This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is October 2nd, 2025.
I'm Scott Loneboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, the BC Legislature is returning on Monday as the Conservatives face yet more infighting. Our neighbors, Alberta, want a pipeline. It's a perpetual story, but once again, they're going to try and make it happen. And the federal NDP race is getting going as we have some real contestants finally. Support the show, patreon.com/politicos to keep the conversation going until next week. Let's start here in BC. Not a lot to say about the legislature, but we do have some teasers from House Leader Mike Farnworth about what to expect in the 6-week sitting that will happen this month and next. 18 bills covering a lot of stuff they teased in the past. But I don't know. There's nothing in here that goes, we're changing direction. We're going to go hard to make life affordable. It's, what they've talked about for the last year.
Yeah, more like a slight preview of when the House comes back than anything too clear on that, other than that the one thing that got mentioned was a transmission line in northern BC. Like, fine, but I don't know, it'd be kind of curious to see what else there was. And if the BC government's kind of running a little on empty. It doesn't seem to have a lot of big things it clearly wants to do. So I don't know, would have expected a little more effort to do some stage setting for the legislative session coming up.
They did say they're not going to bring back the let the government change all the laws without asking the legislature first policy, which is good. I would have been shocked if they tried that again. That was a mistake the first time and would be wild to try again. But I think the more interesting thing that is kind of angled around in the CBC article we'll link to and Stuart Press comments in it is the political tensions are quite high right now. We know that within the legislature, the dynamic is complicated with 4 official parties plus 2 independents plus a new BC Green leader who's not in the legislature. And then outside the legislature, it sounds like the BCGEU strike is going to make their voices heard, which they've been ramping up in the last week as the contract negotiations have not been going well. Not even mentioned in there is that I think the teachers are also getting a bit uppity and tense for a contract as well. Alberta is days from a teacher strike, and BC could follow.
Yeah, so they've got a tough stretch ahead of them. The BCGEU strike doesn't seem to have caused too much damage to the government brand yet, but that could definitely change the longer it goes on.
Yeah, so I guess the interesting thing will be maybe less on the NDP side, though I'll be definitely watching what the government brings forward, and more on the opposition as John Rustad is under fire yet again, this time from the other side of his party. Just prior to Truth and Reconciliation Day, BC Conservative communications staffer and former board member Lindsay Shepherd, also famous for showing the Jordan Peterson video in her class as a TA at Wilfrid Laurier, is...
Yeah, that's a name I've not heard in a long time.
Yeah, well, she's been around the BC Conservatives for a couple of years now, and before that was with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. She had tweeted out in advance of Reconciliation Day or Orange Shirt Day some comments about not liking the orange shirt, not really believing there are bodies buried because none have been dug up and shown to her. And once people called her pretty racist for posting. She did delete her posts, but there was still a furor over this for a day or so before she announced that she had been fired from the BC Conservative for her comments. And she's 23 weeks pregnant, Scott. How could they do this to someone with kids? Or was it 32 weeks? She's very, very
in the
pregnant.
30s.
Yes, she's very pregnant, has kids. How could you do this to the children? The irony not lost on many people.
Well, beyond the comments themselves, which, Colin flying the reconciliation-related distress is more than a bit much. Not a great thing to say. But beyond that, violated the cardinal rule of being a political staffer, which is you don't become the story. You're there to support the party and not support the electeds and not cause problems for them by becoming a distraction. So, on that front, just didn't understand the job. It didn't nail the execution on that front. So I don't see how a party wouldn't have brought some kind of discipline or change in job as a result of that.
Yeah, I think it's entirely reasonable what the BC Conservatives did in this case. What I find fascinating is the fallout from it, because there were a number of people around the BC Conservative orbit, including some past MLAs who were standing in solidarity with Lindsay Shepherd. And it kind of still raises this question about how stable John Rustad's hold is on this party. Lindsay Shepherd saying these things is not a surprise. It was very clear who she's been for quite a few years. And she's been central to this party for a while. So I'm actually surprised it took this long for it to blow up like this. It'll be interesting to see how the party flows from here. I wouldn't be surprised if Shepherd lands with 1BC, or she seems to do well landing on her feet at another conservative group or right-wing group every couple of years. Maybe she'll take this as her time for her maternity leave, or maybe she'll file a discrimination case based on her pregnancy. I would find some irony in that as well. Fun times at the BC Conservatives. On the NDP side, though, Rob Shaw got his hands on a report that was commissioned a couple of years ago that tried to look at whether we could build ferries in BC, and it concluded, yes, in fact, anything is possible if you are willing to pay enough and wait long enough.
Yeah, slap a bunch of Buy Canadian requirements on it, which is kind of what everyone expected. I'm not sure what the big scoop here is so much as it's one of those news stories that kind of just confirms what everybody already suspected.
I think the sympathetic to the story take is the government's line was no one in BC wanted or said they could do this, right? C-SPAN and the other shipyards said they didn't have the capacity, or they didn't even make bids. But this showed a path where the bid could have been designed differently and tilted in a way that we could have made them here. I think, obviously it would have cost more, but the argument could have been national security or domestic industry interests or local economy. There's lots of arguments you can make for that.
Rights. There's several you can get into on that.
Yeah, and it mentions them in the article. The bigger killer, though, is that the boats would have taken longer, which maybe you have to eat that cost, but BC Ferries always feels a bit behind on its production. The boats aren't new that you ride between the various islands, and so it's not surprising to me that they didn't go with this plan, but it is interesting to see the what-if scenarios that existed.
Yeah, and the other big thing here is that when this report was written, kind of the politics and social acceptability of going outside of Canada, or particularly to China, I think was a little different. There's still the, lingering tensions over stuff like the detention of the two Michaels. But I don't think the the trade concerns were quite as forefront as they have been in the past, 6 months or so. Well, I guess closer to like 9 to 10 months now, but the politics has just shifted, and I don't necessarily think we should have needed to have built these in Canada, but maybe just not send them to a shipyard that is also in the process of building ships to conduct a maritime invasion of Taiwan. Would fellow democracy would just be like a decent compromise on that. Like the Koreans, giant shipbuilding industry there, one of the world leaders in it. Like, could we not have gotten ships that were reasonably cost effective and on a decent timeline from there?
Did they make a bid? I don't even know.
I don't know. Like, that's the thing. There's not been enough transparency on this to have any sense of that.
I mean, if China is making boats for us, they can't make boats for their military at the same shipyard at the exact same time. For the same reason, like we couldn't build them here. I don't expect. I don't know. I'm really bad at judging the ferry story, honestly. I feel like it's not much, but it just keeps getting drawn up. Probably because people like talking about the ferries, I guess. And it's easy to wrap your head around. And it's funny because the NDP fucked up the ferries so bad in the 90s that maybe they'll do it again. And that's what'll bring them down. And I'm like, I don't know, man. People, I think, just want some good ferries. I mean, if we don't get
having
good
grown
ferries,
up on the island, I can say with a lot of certainty that the ferries are a perennial topic, that they are never going away in BC politics.
Neither are pipelines, apparently, as the Alberta government has announced it's going to spearhead a pipeline project. No private firm is eager to do the work on this, but the Alberta government has said it's going to work with Enbridge, South Bow Corps, and Trans Mountain Corps to develop a plan to put a pipeline to Prince Rupert or Kitimat. They don't really have a route planned, but
that's part of the thing they're going to do is try and figure out that route.
They're going to figure this all out by May, and then they want a stamp from the Major Projects Office from the federal government to, fast track this non-existent project into existence. They figure if they can spend $14 million to get it to that major projects approval, then maybe one of these companies will show up with some money. But in the meantime, the Alberta government and the Alberta taxpayers are on the hook for this hypothetical pipeline.
I mean, all projects are hypothetical at one point. Like, I'm not sure that's the thing to focus on here.
No, but it's hypothetical in that no company is doing this on their own. No one is. The oil companies are not that eager to put their own money behind it, that the province of Alberta has to backstop it and do it.
Yeah, I'm sure the province of Alberta's response to that would be something about how the regulatory environment's being made too risky and complicated to have that be led by a company. I don't know. It's kind of what I expected to happen as soon as like all of this stuff got rolling. Back a few months ago. So on that front, like, hardly a surprise what was happening. Like, it seemed to be kind of the next obvious thing would be that the government of Alberta would put some of its money into some infrastructure for its primary industry on that. The more interesting thing, I think, is EB's response and kind of how the whole we're all in this together, one Canadian economy thing lasted all of 6 months.
Well, his comment specifically is there is no project proponent. This is a taxpayer-funded initiative by the taxpayers of Alberta currently and proposed to also be the taxpayers of Canada through the publicly owned Trans Mountain project as well. This pipeline project requires a tanker ban off the coast to be lifted if hypothetically a proponent was ever found. He called the ban foundational, and that many First Nations in the way are unlikely to grant consent to this. Alberta has said it's working with some Indigenous partners, but it hasn't named how many or if they even have a likely path to win over the nations between Fort Mac and Kitimat, which seems unlikely. So, like, this is, you could call it nation building, but this is really Alberta building, right? This isn't a project to build Canada. This is a project to not even build Alberta, but to like let Alberta maintain its mid-20th century obsession with a dying industry.
I mean, you could say that about like almost any project that's been floated, like the mines that are in BC. You know, it's not like Ontario is getting the work for that. Like, it's geographically located, and there's going to be one province that is, you know, going to be where the economic activity happens. Doesn't mean there isn't like a broader national aspect to it, because, you know, it is one country. The revenues from the resource industry in BC, some of that ends up in the federal coffers, and a bunch more of it ends up circulating in the economy. And, you know, same thing for the resource industry in Alberta. There seems to be like a bit of a, like, I don't want to quite say double standard, but like the approach seems to be a little different for each of them, even though it's like not actually all that different on like the overall theoretical level.
I think there is a need to look at the actual, or at least there's two angles that I think we do need to look at. I think we do need to look at the climate and the future, and what is the demand for this much more oil export. And that kind of ties to the lack of private interest in this. Like, all of the projects that were greenlit already and that are on the like next tier are shovel ready, are private industries ready to go for them. If Alberta's not talking about owning this, they're talking about getting it set up so that hopefully someone takes it over, which is kind of what Trudeau did with Trans Mountain Pipeline. Is he bought it and said, eventually we'll sell it off. And so far, I don't believe they have. And so it's just a big, you know, liability or asset on the balance sheet, depending on your view on it. It definitely cost a lot. Some of the projects that are being talked about, though, like the wind turbines off the East Coast, can support nation building and do look to the future. They can provide energy for Atlantic Canada. We don't have enough transmission lines across the country, which is something many people have talked about in terms of nation building, is these the energy corridors across the country. The talk about the ports in Churchill, I think, is an interesting way to look at it, because then you can start to bring resources from different provinces to trade, and that helps. Another pipeline just seems so predictable and desperate by Alberta. They only have one trick. And like, Alberta's a big province. I grew up there. I know they have more potential than this. They could do so much more and be so much better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree that the Alberta government's a little overly focused on this, but you know, when you're in a situation where you do need to basically go all out on getting the economy as strong as possible in the wake of a very disruptive change to the country's economy and trading environment, like, I just don't think, I think it's, you got to put everything on the table here. You know, the 51st state comments were back this week. Like, we're dealing with we have a weaker hand, and we need to desperately pull at every card we possibly can in order to strengthen the hand. And anything that has the potential for a positive ROI should be looked at.
But does this have any possibility of a positive ROI? The Trans Mountain Pipeline isn't running at capacity. Like, it's not even close. So this is just like, Alberta likes oil and wants to yell about anything that impedes its ability to rip oil out of the ground and send it. If we want to build a stronger economy in Canada, shouldn't we also be processing some of that oil in Canada? Like, that would take a serious government investment. but it could actually pay off much better, since one of the big complaints Alberta tends to have is that nowhere wants to take its dirty oil because it takes a lot of effort and energy to actually process bitumen into usable fuel. But if we could do that here, then you can sell gasoline anywhere easier than you can sell, West Coast crude or Western Standard crude.
I mean, yeah, if Alberta wants to float it, like, why not put that on the project's list?
It would be easier for them to do than trying to push another pipeline through northern BC, politically and well, maybe not economically, but anyway, I guess we'll see in May if this moves along from the federal government or from the provincial government of Alberta. Federally, Mark Carney is turning his attention towards the upcoming budget, and I think importantly, how's he going to get the votes to get there? Yves-François Blanchet of the Bloc Québécois came out this week and said the budget has no legitimacy and he has no interest in supporting this government, so they will be voting against it most likely. I haven't seen what the Conservatives have said, but I believe their standard...
They're presumably going to vote against
Actually,
it.
I think their standard line has been they're not going to vote for a budget that increases the deficit, which
is going to be pretty much impossible to do, short of going like real scorched earth on spending.
And so that leaves the NDP, or people just missing conveniently. Don Davies was meeting with Mark Carney yesterday to talk about NDP priorities. He said the NDP is very concerned about the number of jobs that have been lost over the last couple months. That needs to be a priority, as well as standard NDP issues. And that it just needs to be good for working people. And so he didn't say the NDP will vote against it. It would be hard for the NDP to go to an election right now, given that they have no money and no permanent leader.
Well, they're in debt. They have less than no money at this point. And I imagine getting more campaign loans when they're in such a rough spot would be very tough. And also, no permanent leader. So, like, the NDP clearly and obviously doesn't want to just repeat the mistake of the last term where it looked like they were just basically there to prop up the Liberals, but they are just in such a tough spot when it comes to being election ready. They just cannot afford it. So I'm gonna guess they figure out a quasi face-saving way to ensure the budget passes, even if they don't affirmatively vote for it.
And I mean, aside from Heather McPherson, and we'll talk about her and the other candidates later, she's the only NDP member of caucus who is officially running for leader right now. So other than her, if they vote for this budget, the next leader can come in and be like, caucus made a mistake. They shouldn't have done that. We're going ahead hard. And like, they can reset the agenda. Even if she wins it, she can try to do that, although it'll be a little bit more awkward for her because they can just say, didn't you just support this government 6 months ago?
Yeah, the thing is, the votes are so close, you can probably just pull in an abstention or have a few people not show up that day and get it to work. But
yeah, they're in a tough spot. Elizabeth May is apparently going to meet with Mark Carney fairly shortly as well to discuss the budget and her. I was going to say the Green parties, but it's her. By the way, she just got 80% in their leadership review. She managed to best Merritt Stiles of the Ontario NDP and John Rustad.
I was honestly not even aware there was one going on.
I think it's just one of the party's standard reviews after an election. She did say she's still intending to resign soon. So I think people were happy or the few Green members who voted were happy to say, sure, whatever, you're fine. Because if you're with the Green Party in 2025, you don't have that big of a problem with Elizabeth May.
No, considers basically is the Elizabeth May party at this point.
So,
yeah. The block lines about no legitimacy is kind of funny, considering like they're the government. They get to be the ones to propose the budget on it. That's it. Like the block is probably one of the parties. I don't actually know what their short financial situation is, but like just the political wins are such that I'm sure there would not be all that sad to go into an election. Some of their finances are even half half decent shape there. So, it's one of those things where the Bloc can do the typical Bloc thing of, be fine if there was an election, but also, if there is some big giveaway for Quebec, which it's a Liberal Party budget, so there probably will be. They can turn around and claim there's, been enough going to Quebec in this that they can support it, particularly because the Bloc is the most transactional of all the parties.
Yeah, they've supported both stripes to keep minorities alive. To Blanchette's, to elaborate on Blanchette, what he told the media was that there were no consultations, so there's no legitimacy. He went on to say, he hasn't fully ruled out voting against it, but I don't see how he says, I don't see how I could support it. I don't see how we could support a budget which is first based on some tax reductions, electoral gifts, and some fantasies in many regards. And so they're planning to vote no, but maybe. Because, this is going to be the austerity investment budget.
Yeah, which is an interesting political tightrope for Carney to walk. And the background on all this is Carney's poll numbers have started to soften a bit. It seems like the honeymoon period is over. And, in Quebec, it's looking like the PQ is going to win the provincial election coming up, or at least has a decent shot at it. It's kind of the presumptive front runner.
Specifically, the CAQ is going to lose the election. That's how elections happen in Canada.
That is true, but there's a lot of talk about the potential of a PQ government coming out of this. So, those political wins could, help the Bloc sales on that one too.
One of the things that's become weirdly awkward for the federal government is a couple weeks ago, MP Vince Gasparo, the Parliamentary Secretary for Combating Crime, announced on behalf of the Government of Canada that an Irish punk rap band called Kneecap was deemed ineligible for entry, quote, on advice of our officials. He made this announcement on social media. It kind of surprised a lot of people. Probably most people went, who is Kneecap? And then if you look them up, they look like what you would expect a controversial Irish hip-hop group to look like, where they're wearing the balaclava and the Irish flag. And
so and you had a few people asking, why is a parliamentary secretary for crime announcing this one?
And then as you dig into the story, the band is asking, what? We never got a letter from the Government of Canada. We never got an email. We never got any formal communication that we are banned. As things have moved forward, they have been granted their e-travel authorizations to come and perform concerts here. At the time Gasparo made his announcement, the UK was investigating terrorism charges against the band. One of the members,
they've been not just investigating; they've been filed.
Yes, they've been filed, but they've been withdrawn since. There was a couple. It's not hard to find controversy about this band. They have praised Hamas and Hezbollah, and they've called for the death of MPs. And I think at one point someone threw a Hamas flag, like not the Palestinian flag, a Hamas flag on stage, and they wore that. So I get why people don't like them and view them as controversial and would call for their ban.
Those are all pretty bad things to do. And you don't need to associate yourself with Hamas and Hezbollah.
Nevertheless, we don't know what's happened other than this announcement from the MP, because Kneecap's lawyers also announced that they were going to sue Gasparo and the Government of Canada for defamation, because they said, we're not terrorists, we're not doing terrorism, we're an ironic punk band or whatever, hip-hop band, and we don't have any proof we've been banned. And now the government is tight-lipped because they say, this is a private immigration matter and we don't disclose immigration things publicly. Which, there's a small exception for the public interest, which is how it was possibly legal Gasparo said anything. But it's just left this open question of, are they allowed to come to Canada?
Yeah, like the vibe you get from this is kind of that he was just kind of freelance in this one, which also seems weird and improper.
There'd been at least one statement, I think, that someone got from the Privy Council office that they didn't know he was going to announce this. I've seen a couple like rumors come out that it was like he gave no tip off. He had no clearance from the PMO to go. He went rogue.
Yeah, but even from that, it's not entirely clear if there had been a decision made, which he publicized by going off on his own, after he just decided to announce that that's what the decision was.
So at this point, both the NDP and Conservatives are asking for clarity for just like what happened. Jenny Kwan has a formal parliamentary request to find out what's happened. I think the Conservatives are also putting forward some questions on this as well. It's a very bizarre story, and there's not been any statement from the government. We haven't had, like, if he did go rogue, we haven't had Gasparo get like his parliamentary secretary role stripped from him. I think they're hoping it blows over, but it's starting to become an issue for them. When it was like initially, the band was mad and some leftists online. And now like the Conservatives are mad that they just don't know what's happening. I think like the Conservatives weren't mad it got banned for the reasons we talked about them being controversial, but it was like now it's unclear what is happening and how government is even working.
It's a mess, the whole thing just is now a distraction and unforced error on the Liberals' part, probably because of one person deciding to freelance things.
Pro tip for MPs: don't go on social media and ban bands you don't like from the country. Shouldn't need to learn that lesson in MP school, but I guess he missed that day. Speaking of terrorists, Canada has added the Bishnoi gang of India to the listed terrorist entities. This is something Premier David Eby and Memoni in British Columbia have been calling for a while, as this group has been linked to a number of criminal activities in British Columbia, including embezzlement, corruption.
Extortion's been a big one.
Extortion is the word I was actually looking for. And the assassination of Nijar a couple years ago. So that comes as relief to many. I still have my very mixed feelings about the entire idea of a terrorist list, because it is ultimately a political nightmare, and whoever is in government picks the ones they don't like.
For it. The bigger question here is like necessarily why is this organization being added to it? So like you have some your very clear cases, your Al Qaeda's, your Hezbollah's, your IRAs, whereas like there's not really any real uncertainty about the fact that these are groups using violence to achieve political outcomes, kind of the definition of terrorism. This one's a little weird, though, in that, like, when you hear what the politicians and, like, David Eby was saying and Danielle Smith and kind of everyone talking about this, is you mostly hear about kind of what sounds by and large like fairly routine, if on it's somewhat extreme end of organized crime activity, more than something that is a clear political violence end of it. And like the only thing that really I've seen that speaks to that is the suggestion that they were hired by the Indian government for some of their illegal activities in Canada and elsewhere, which, I'm pretty good with the government coming down real hard on that sort of thing. But this almost kind of feels like a case of this group's causing a lot of problems. We need to deal with them. Let's reach for the nearest tool in the toolbox on this one. Because, by being designated, the government has now a bunch more tools around limiting who can do business with them, seizing the properties, all that sort of stuff. It becomes an offense just to be a member of the organization. There's all that, but it almost that feels like a thing of convenience rather than a use of the designation as it was really intended. And, maybe rather than doing this, the federal government should be looking at some criminal code changes around the ability to go after organized crime more than this.
I'm trying to play through it in my mind because I think there is a deep Islamophobic bias to the terror list in that 90% of the groups on there are Muslim or Islamic in shape or form or identity. And then you have a few neo-Nazi groups. And I'm trying to make sure we're not just, dismissing the concerns of the Sikh or Punjabi communities or the Indian diaspora in Canada because this doesn't quite fit that mold or those molds. And I'm trying to think, is it a different thing or is it like Hell's Angels India? Which I think is the argument you're trying to make, right? It's like an organized crime gang that does bad things, like, to use the government's language, generates terror in communities in which they operate through involvement in extortions and intimidation, engages in murder, shooting, and arson, and creates a climate of insecurity for Canadians in the diaspora community as it targets them, their prominent community members, their businesses, as well as cultural figures. I guess the question is, what is its political goals, if any, beyond just like make money? Like the Tamil Tigers are listed, but they connect to the liberation, or the World Tamil Movement, I should say. They're connected to the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam in Canada, which wants to break Tamil away. A lot of other groups have that political angle. Even the neo-Nazi groups have political angles to them.
It's kind of definitional to what terrorism is.
So, like, ultimately, sure, they're a bad group. I'm not going to defend them very much. This has been something called for from people in, the Indian diaspora community in British Columbia. So I'm not going to say this is a ridiculous move. But yeah, let's hope it makes people a little bit safer, at least.
Yeah, I guess kind of where I ultimately come down on this is, clamping down on this group and going after them is a good thing to do. This just seems like a bit of a kludge on it, and it would be, better from a how to run a government and society and deal with groups like this perspective to come up with a different tool set for it.
I'm just scrolling through the list to see what else is weird. The International Relief Fund for the Afflicted and Needy Canada is also listed as a terrorist organization.
It's got, I'm guessing, a fundraising front?
Yeah, this is a charity that they allege has transferred $14.6 million worth of resources to organizations with links to Hamas. So this group, IRFAN, has never done terrorism in Canada or really anywhere, but they have transferred money from Canada. And so rather than just strip them of charitable status, they made them a terrorist. It's kind of like Samadoun hasn't done terrorism, but is alleged to have transferred money to and provided like support for Hamas indirectly. The list is weird.
Yeah. Although I think to make it work, you kind of have to include like the financing and support groups in order to be effective on that. So that one I kind of get.
From terrorism around the world to fixing procurement, we have a new, is this a crown corporation to...
I think it's an agency, not a crown corporation.
Right. Whatever even is the difference. The Defense Investment Agency is going to save us from wasting government funds buying military gear.
Yeah, I think the main difference is the Crown Corp is basically a business entity that is there to perform, various business roles, and kind of has a typical corporate structure of, a board and a CEO and everything, where an agency is more of we're the government, we need to do something, so we're setting up this organization to do it. But that's kind of a little beside the point on this one. Yeah, so basically in the efforts to fix the eternal problems of procuring stuff for the military in Canada, the Prime Minister announced they were basically gonna set up a new agency to handle, well, some of the stuff. So basically anything over $100 million is now going to be handled by this agency rather than the bureaucratic morass that was the other approach to procurement, which will hopefully speed things up and, reduce costs, improve timelines, all of that. Does kind of lead the question of what's with that threshold? It almost seems to be replicating the kind of similar approach of the Major Projects Office of, we admit that the system is fundamentally broken and doesn't serve its purpose and is causing a bunch of problems. So rather than fix that, we're just going to create this new second process and kind of let some of the stuff go there, but still keep the old broken one. And that's potentially a problem, and it would be much better to actually just fix the thing, and particularly because, as we've seen in Ukraine, like there's a pretty fast development and deployment cycle for like a lot of the new technologies, and these big decades-long billion-dollar contracts is not necessarily how things actually are going to be developed in the future. So cutting the smaller, $50 million contracts out of it potentially causes problems when, drone warfare is advancing pretty quickly, and you have to iterate on that one on a matter of, months for a country at peacetime, and like days or weeks in an actual conflict.
So reading this announcement, it sounds like it's going to be rolled out in phases. First, there's going to be an 8 to 12 month phase to get the thing going, where they'll start taking over some procurement. And then, for example, procuring 12 new submarines. And then after that, they're going to reach its final form and ready to take even more procurement responsibility. So I do wonder if they're just starting with some big high ticket ones and 100 million plus, and then trying to like test this out, see how it works. And then if it's all going swimmingly in 18 months, it takes over everything, maybe. And then we just scrap all the old systems that didn't work very well.
I mean, that might be the best case scenario, and like hopefully something like that happens.
I will say this is so much more assuring than what Albania has just done, where they appointed Diala as an AI as the first Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence, and it will be taking over procurement responsibilities to ensure that, quote, public tenders will be 100% free of corruption, corruption being a serious public issue in Albania. So having a LLM do it will solve it all, because computers are never biased or wrong.
Yeah, the spin of that. I don't even know what to say on that one. There's so many potential strings to pull on that mess. Yeah, thankfully we aren't doing that.
It was just such a wild story. I felt like mentioning it. But yeah, I mean, if Carney solves Canada's long-standing procurement issues, that'll be great. It'll be something to keep a watch on. I mean, the issues are definitely big in the military because that's often where we have the largest contracts go out, but it's not limited to that. We've seen issues with software updates for payroll in the public sector, all the subcontracting that was going out without...
A little further back than that, there was the Long John registry. That was a huge...
The gun buyback program today.
Yeah, like there's been a lot of those that have not worked out well on procurement.
But it all comes...
defense and IT project seems to be the real bane in Canada.
Yeah, and it ultimately does become a political question, right? Because like we talked about with the ferries for BC, you get competing challenges and priorities with any procurement project. Do we simply go for what's the cheapest? Are we trying to make sure that what we buy will work and that the company... Those are just standard questions you should be asking. But then also, is there a role to use this, procurement effort to boost Canadian industry, which has been lagging for years? And do you overpay to get local jobs? And how much is a reasonable overpay versus you're just like buying boats at some point? So this office is going to continue to have to answer those questions and be under scrutiny, because that's the nature of government. Finally, let's get into the party that wants to one day continue to exist, the NDP. We had 3 recent leadership announcements made formal. There's still a lot of pending and rumors and open secrets, and none of these were closed secrets or surprises. But Avi Lewis, Heather McPherson, and Rob Ashton have all formally announced and been approved by the party to run. Avi Lewis doesn't have his paperwork in with Elections Canada, but not announced candidate Tennealle Johnston does. And then there's Eve Engler and Tony McQuail, who neither have their paperwork in with Elections Canada or have been greenlit by the NDP to run. So a race that is between 3 and 6 people is starting to take shape. And I don't think we're going to see more than that. I know there have been rumors about other people, but I think they're all keeping their heads down. So let's maybe take this in order from, I don't know, my vibes of who will win. Let's start with Heather McPherson, NDP MP from Edmonton Strathcona, kind of the establishment choice for the party. What's your vibe on Heather?
Yeah, that's probably about right. Establishment, very, very typical NDP MP.
They're all very typical NDP, Scott. That's to different degrees.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen an Engler in the parliamentary wing, the elected wing, for quite a while. Yeah, I don't know. Nothing all that special to say. Worked for an NGO before running for office. The most noteworthy thing, I think, is that she represents Edmonton, so that's an Alberta voice, which has often been a little sparse in federal NDP, but that's about it. She's probably the presumptive front runner.
Yeah. In her launching announcement speech. She didn't give a lot of substance, but there was that vibe. There was some comments about the party should be open, there shouldn't be purity tests.
Which hilariously then resulted in purity tests about whether or not you should use the phrase purity tests.
Yes, because you
caused
shouldn't.
a whole brouhaha in the NDP.
Yeah, and it wasn't just online leftists being mad at that. Leah Gazan, another MP, called that out. Matthew Green as well, who is part of a Reclaim NDP effort with Peter Julian, released a statement, saying that kind of language is unhelpful because the NDP needs to attract a diverse coalition and not, marginalized voices within the party, which is how it kind of gets read in. So there's definitely...
I'm not sure that's how it should be read, though. There's definitely a way that the NDP takes a very, kind of strict line. There's a way... one of the big questions that's the NDP has to resolve is, how much are they a party of, highly educated urban progressives, the type of people who, work for an NGO or a nonprofit and then make the jump into politics, and how much are they the party of their traditional blue collar roots. And the way a lot of that first group talk is very much there's a specific dialect, almost very specific language that is, out of a university sociology class. And it's, not super accessible to a lot of people who haven't been steeped in the culture that uses those forms of language. And, if you want to be a big party that does grow, you have to also have a little grace when it comes to people who don't necessarily come from that way and have internalized that way of speaking. And, there's been a lot of sometimes elected members, sometimes just the rank and file, who've not always been super accepting of people as they work out how to talk about some of those issues, and or even just don't necessarily speak in the same way that the more urban progressive, high education urban progressive wing speaks.
I get the argument. I hear it a lot, but I think it is fundamentally wrong, because when we talk about who are the working class that the NDP need to appeal to, the vision that is kind of pushed with the idea that the blue collar, it's Rob Ashton, it's the white, who we'll talk about in a second, and we'll move a little bit quicker through the rest, but it's the white manufacturing union guy. But the reality of the working class in this country is that it is very diverse, it's very racialized, it's very female in a lot of industries and service industries as well, and not being able to recognize that and talk about it is to lose those votes. And so I think the NDP needs to be careful about how it talks, but it also does need to still make sure it does talk about issues of racism and sexism, and talking about purity tests can be viewed as a way to try to avoid those conversations.
Yeah, I don't think that's how McPherson was meaning it, or Don Davis was meaning it when he made similar comments a few weeks back on Steve Paton's podcast.
I think the other background to remember, though, is there is this tense divide in caucus right now, right? We saw this shortly after Don Davies was named interim leader, where Leah Gazan, Laurie Idlut, and Jenny Kwan, the three non-white members of caucus, went, hey, we weren't consulted, we're really mad about this. I think whoever wins is going to have a very uncomfortable caucus to lead. Yeah,
it's not like there aren't tensions within the party. Just on the point about the white working class thing, it's not like the non-white working class also speaks as if they came out of a sociology seminar. that very specific way of speaking and kind of the general culture of the working class, transcends race on that. And I think that's just something we should keep in mind.
Speaking of the urban progressive stereotypical, we have Avi Lewis running for leader. He announced as well. He has run a couple times unsuccessfully in Metro Vancouver and Sunshine Coast in the last couple elections, and is probably more famous for being the co-author of the LEAP Manifesto. He is NDP blood as much as there is. His dad and father were prominent members and leaders of the NDP at various times and in various provinces. He was a filmmaker, environmental activist, obviously, married to Naomi Klein, also a prominent activist and environmentalist and anti-capitalist. And so he comes forward with that. I thought his campaign video was pretty good that he launched. They're actually all coming out with pretty slick materials, which is nice to see, that they all have some talent, some web design talent. It is 2025, so it's not hard to find, I guess. But yeah. What are your thoughts on Avi Lewis?
I mean, the guy has run multiple times in some very progressive areas and haven't been able to win. I have no idea why people think he would have a better shot as a leader than a candidate in Vancouver, but is what it is. I mean,
he ran in Vancouver Centre, which was just like an ill-fated attempt. I don't know why you would run in Vancouver Centre unless your name is Haiti Fry. He got 12% there, and he got
but it's an area of the NDP control provincially. Like Fry is a strong candidate with the advantage of incumbency, but any riding in the city of Vancouver should be something. Well, maybe not the west side, but like any riding that isn't the west side ought to be like fertile ground for the NDP.
Haiti Fry has been the MP there since 1993. Like, some of them were closer than they have been recently, but I don't blame him for losing that. He did do very badly, but it was a bad election overall. In 2021, he came in third with 25% in West Vancouver Sunshine Coast Sea to Sky, which was won by the Liberals at that time. I think initially Avi was potentially going to be the runner-up. It's going to be a tight race between the two of them, but I think, as we'll talk about in a second, it might be a little bit more open than that.
Yeah, and like the LEAP Manifesto is definitely going to be baitage for him, not in the leadership race. But
it might be. A lot of people in the party don't like that.
Yeah, I mean, it did cause some challenges for the party, and particularly with some of the groups that the party is in fact trying to win back. The more rural working class portions that have basically left the party since then. But yeah, it's definitely going to be something that the NDP are going to get attacked with relentlessly if he does end up becoming leader. But I don't see a lot of room for him to grow the appeal of the NDP outside of the few seats they still have.
Next up is Rob Ashton, who is the president of the International Longshore Workers Union here in British Columbia. Has not entered electoral politics before, and had been rumored to be sniffing around for a leadership bid recently. And then, like, this week, got all the headlines for his launch. Like, it went, I think he had one of the most successful launches of any of them, because his opening speech was quoted "Eat the Rich" in the Toronto Star, and he had a lot of strong lines in there where he says things like, working people built this country, working people should lead this country, and really leaned into that kind of left-wing populist rhetoric around getting the working class in power.
Yeah, and And he does it a lot more authentically than Lewis does. So like on that front, like I think he will have the effect of squeezing out Avi Lewis from that lane in the leadership race fairly effectively on that, which potentially makes it a bit of a crowded field for the non the non-establishment lane.
Yeah, I mean it's a ranked ballot, so they can come up the middle, and even if Heather McPherson wins on first ballot, if she doesn't take a majority, she might not have the down ballot support to take it unless she's at like 48% or something. So be curious to watch how that goes. But yeah, Rob got a lot of energy off his top. I'm curious how it will land and how his campaign will develop, because it's one of the most like aggressive, but as you say, like authentic. Because as we'll talk about, like some of the others, I don't think bring that same authenticity to it. And yeah,
and I think he'd be of everyone so far. Well, actually, pretty much everyone on this. I think he'd be the only one that would really put places like Windsor back in play for the NDP. I've blanking on the name of the riding, but the one that includes Timmins, that is Charlie Angus's old riding. Like those places that used to be pretty strong NDP areas that have lost that. Yeah, he, out of anyone here, probably has the best shot at that.
Of course, he's untested electorally besides a union race, which is a different battlefield entirely, but he could, the only person here who's won election is Heather McPherson. Someone else who hasn't won election and is sniffing around, Tennille Johnston.
She ran a local
that's
election.
True. Tennille, won a former city councillor from Campbell River, so she did win that, but lost in the last federal election to Aaron Gunn in the North Island riding, I believe. Indigenous woman, don't know much about her politics, and we'll have to see when she announces. She is soliciting signatures right now and has registered with Elections Canada, so I guess I'll just wait on her announcement before looking too much into that.
Yeah, but I mean, the race has been going on for a little while now. Still doing the signature drive is a bit of a sign that there's not a huge amount of energy behind that campaign. So I'm going to expect that not going to do super well in the election.
Yeah, maybe a profile raising effort for her, but I'll see. Maybe she launches something even more headline grabbing than Rob did. Finally, Eve Engler, as we've kind of alluded to, has been saying he's running for a while now, has been holding rallies across the country, and I've seen he's getting crowds out, a few dozen people here and there, 50, 60, 80 people in Burnaby, for example, and has said he's raised $60,000, $70,000 already.
Not having registered with Elections Canada is kind of an interesting asterisk on that.
Yeah, and also not having the full approval from the party, but I also get it's a short race, and if you're worried about that, a big part of his campaign is arguing that he should not be disqualified from running for the party.
Which is, just a great sign. Like, really starting off strong on that one. Which, like, granted, there are several potential things that ought to be disqualifying. Just off the top of my head, the whole Rwandan genocide denial bit.
Yeah, he authored a piece a few years ago where he tried to argue the numbers are too high and should be lower. And that was weird enough, but it's that he got into Twitter debates about it again more recently when people asked him about it. And it's like, dude, you could just not post. Like you could just leave your weird opinion.
This guy is a poster. Yeah.
So
he is, addicted to the Twitter machine. Like I can recognize a poster, and he absolutely is one. He is
And
They will
sometimes
be pulling the phone away from him as he yells, "I will never log off."
And sometimes that can be a great person to watch get elected, like Sean Orr in the city of Vancouver, but I don't know if they make for leadership material. No offense to Sean.
No, it would be a disaster if the guy got the leadership. Like, we thought the NDP went much lower than 7 seats. Like, he gets elected, and the entire strategy will be trying to scoop the 100 votes in Vancouver East that get divided between the two communist parties that run there. And like
3
appeal to
if Eve Engler is in part of the NDP.
Yeah, that's kind of my point. Is he will be narrow casting on that demographic and will have very little appeal to pretty much anyone else.
Like, I think, yeah, I don't disagree. I know there's some who like him. I'm also in some leftist forums where they're like, just tired of him because it seems like a lot of the stuff Eve Engler does is for Eve Engler first, versus like someone like Rob Ashton. You get the sense is he's got a cushy job where he is. He doesn't have to throw his hat in for the NDP leadership. And they're probably going to talk about a lot of the same economic issues, just one in a way that gets through it and one in a way that just makes people really annoyed.
Yeah, Engler absolutely has it was like the spitting image of the stereotypical like radical leftist who thinks he's like, speaking truth to power, but is mostly just annoying people with his crazy takes.
So we'll see. We'll see if he gets into the race or not. It's an open question.
I honestly suspect that he might be trying to do this as a profile raising thing and trying to get disqualified without getting disqualified, so he can do or without looking like he's trying to get disqualified, so he can do the NDP are a bunch of neoliberal sellouts, and,
which they are.
I mean, you'd be hard pressed to honestly define the NDP as neoliberal, but
they're not as neoliberal as the others. Fine.
I mean, they're
shifted
not
hard in the last 30 years from where they were.
Circling back to the point is, it does, with his whole approach to it all, the energy he's brought, the kind of the subtext of a lot of the things he's saying, and sometimes outright text, is it sure seems like he is doing wants to make a big thing about how the NDP are a bunch of sellouts and the party's not legitimate as a profile building enterprise to suit Eve Engler.
The final person in the race quickly is farmer Tony McQuail, who I think I've mentioned on the podcast before. Also, I've talked about him elsewhere. He's an interesting guy. He's run for the party several times in rural Ontario, never done particularly well, but that's more, I don't think that's necessarily his fault, more the place he has been running. He wants to merge the party with the Greens and make a green progressive slate to run for the next election. Seems sincere, seems like a good guy who's kind of looks at the current political climate and goes, there's too many parties. We need to get proportional representation, but until then, we shouldn't be fighting against the party that's closest to us ideologically. And some argument to it at this point.
He starts me as one of those people that's like very sincere, but like doesn't quite understand all of like the mechanisms, the history, and like how things got to where they are and why they exist the way they do, and is kind of going to make an earnest but ultimately futile attempt to change things with a perhaps misdiagnosed strategy and approach. Like, the thing that's holding the NDP back is not the existence of the Green Party.
I do hope he gets into the race, because I think it would be interesting to see him there. In the past, I've not been as supportive of NDP should work with other parties, because I kind of like the way the Rachel Notley NDP just basically said, no, we're the best alternative, pick us. And ideally then they would have done electoral reform, but they didn't, and that was their loss, and now they're perpetual opposition. So anyway, good luck, Tony.
Yeah, with him, I think there's definitely an open question of whether he's getting the signatures and the nomination deposit, but he'd be an interesting addition at least, and yeah, one that I think would add some color in a way that, in like a positive way, in a way that Angler wouldn't. But yeah, probably not making the cut would be my guess.
And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.